The seeds of startup success.
Hi, everyone. Okay. Thanks so much for making it back from lunch. I think Meshari had an amazing joke that he told me over lunch that we should just steal everyone's dessert and people will get back here a bit faster. Just to tell you a bit about myself, my name is Dr. Aman Desai. I am a medical doctor turned life science strategy consultant turned founder. So now I'm building something for the Canadian and US healthcare markets. I am also a podcast host for Scalpels and Spreadsheets, and I have conversations about healthcare innovation around the world. Thank you so much, Alice and Umaima and Meshari for joining us today. So we're going to have a conversation about startups and the best way with them to succeed. I think we can all confidently say we know someone that's built something amazing, and we've probably wondered, well, how on earth did they manage to do that, right? And a lot of times people wonder, like someone's building something, but it's probably not for me. But I think we have examples of people here that have done exactly that, are doing amazing things. And I'd like them to just introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Meshari.
Hello, everyone. My name is Meshari, and I'm the founder and CEO of Amplify Health. At Amplify Health, we combine thermal and hyperspectral imaging with AI to proactively diagnose disease, including vascular conditions and others.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Alice McGee. Pleasure to be here and see familiar faces from Malta. I'm also a doctor by background, and I founded Mara Health, which is a UK-based health tech consultancy. We help startups try and get into the NHS, go to market. We provide a range of advice and support entrepreneurs.
Hi there. Thank you very much for coming after lunch. So my name is Umaima Ahmad. I'm the co-founder and CEO of 52 North. We are a MedTech startup that spun out of the University of Cambridge. And my co-founders and I have very different backgrounds as a clinician, a data scientist, biosensor engineer, and I had a legal background and a pharmaceutical background. What we're doing now is developing solutions to improve the acute oncology pathway, so better care for chemotherapy patients at home.
Thank you for that. So wanted to start off by talking about, the problem space. A lot of times, and we heard today, founders, they try building something, 70% of those startups do eventually fail. And there are a lot of things that can stop a founder from working on something, right? But I think the key fundamental is that the founder needs to be motivated enough to be working on the right problem. So I wanted to ask, just opening to everyone over here, how did you find the problem that you wanted to work on? And why was it the problem that was worth solving for you? And we can start with Alice.
Yeah, so I started Mara Health because I saw a gap. There was other consultancies also working in this space, but really there was a lot of innovators who were starting who didn't necessarily have a healthcare background. Maybe it was someone who was tech, met someone who was finance, or someone who was legal background. And they were just looking for that kind of clinical input, someone who knew the NHS, knew the system well, knew what patients wanted, knew who to speak to. So that's why I set up Mara Health. And then through that, I got to work with a lot of entrepreneurs and founders who were trying to bring their product to market and really kind of help bridge that gap, because a lot of the people we work with are still quite early on. They maybe are not able to hire someone full time. They're looking for someone more on a contractor basis. And we support them until they're in a position where they've raised more funds and they can maybe hire a clinical lead or chief medical officer, for example.
Emma, anything to add?
So in our case, it was very much a patient-led gap that was identified, so patient-clinician-led. So my co-founder, who's an oncologist, was seeing, working in the NHS hospitals in the UK, seeing at the front line a problem that was huge both for patients and for the doctors treating them. So it was a negative for every stakeholder in the pathway. What he saw was that every single chemotherapy patient, so anyone on chemotherapy treatment, is told when they start their treatment, whenever you feel unwell, note they are chemotherapy patients, they probably feel unwell all of the time. Whenever you feel unwell or you get a fever, go straight into the ER. And they do this because there's a risk of them developing a type of sepsis known as neutropenic sepsis. The two problems with this pathway is that of these 100% of patients coming into ER, 50% of them are actually found to be fine, so they get sent home afterwards. And then 50% of the patients are actually not receiving their antibiotics quickly enough when they are exposed and at risk. So these were stories that we were hearing from patients directly saying, quality of life is awful because every time I'm out, I worry, am I getting unwell? Should I be going into the ER? If only there was a way to know at home rather than going into the ER. And so that's where we identified the issue that was also taking up a huge amount of the emergency healthcare time as well. And so we started with that very sort of identified niche and began our product development to cater to that market.
Meshari, anything similar from your background?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just take a step back and comment on what you mentioned about 70% of startups do not succeed. I've published a few papers about this, and actually after 3 months, there is 90% dropout of leveraging and using digital health technology. It does not stick. And if you think more about it and study it more, you'll realize that a lot of these founders focus on the solution, not the problem. And I love the great examples of my panelists here. So that's what we wanted to focus on. How can we focus on a problem? The problem that we found was we've leveraged a lot of the traditional cameras throughout COVID to diagnose disease and to deliver a lot of the remote care. So we thought of how can we leverage additional cameras that exist and publicly available to expand what we can diagnose remotely, and that's where we created Amplify.
Yeah. So, from what you guys have told me, it seems that you found a problem space that you were interested in, that you've seen this unmet need, and you took it upon yourselves to fill that void, to build something that can be used in those spaces. So moving on from finding the actual problem to work on, how did you know what kind of solution was needed? Like when you talk about healthcare, there's a lot of different industries, from the life sciences to the health tech, to MedTech. How did you have those conversations to be able to build the solution as you envisioned it? And we can start with you, Umaima.
Thanks for that question. So it's so important. And one of the things that I often tell people who are starting off in their journey is you don't need a minimum viable product. Your MVP can be a piece of paper. I always use the example of the Palm Pilot. So you probably need to be of a certain generation to know what that is. So the Palm Pilot, sort of pre-BlackBerry days, the original sort of agenda in your hand. So the first prototype of that was actually a block of wood that the guy took around with him and put in his pocket and thought, whenever I have a meeting, I'll pull this out and pretend I'm using it. So really to start out and see how your idea is actually tolerated by the market and how much use it actually has, you need to go out there early and engage with all of the stakeholders. So we did that with patients at the very start. We're looking at local patient groups at our local hospital. We were engaging with the doctors through two of the major sepsis and cancer charities in the UK. And actually, they informed our product development. So they did give, obviously, there's a lot of feedback you receive, and you need to be careful about how much you necessarily let influence the product development, but it's also critical to take that feedback on board. There were suggestions that were made by patients, things like the usability of our device, what mechanism, whether you turn it or pull it to enable a sort of a sample of blood to move from one strip to another. These were all ideas that were very much implemented as a result of what the patients told us.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, so you're saying like there is a lot of noise. Don't do this, don't do that. And at some point you have to make a decision on what's best for your products, what's best for your startup. How do you separate that noise from the actual insights that can help, develop your startup?
So I'm a true believer in consensus and just testing with the people around you. So my team, my co-founders, as I mentioned, we've got very different backgrounds, and I really respect that. And we really take on board each other's opinions. So I think if it goes past that stakeholder group and we all believe it's something that's important, then, you take it forward. But it is so critical. And we received feedback from, this cancer charity called Macmillan that we worked with. The patients would tell us, you guys are the first people who've actually come back and said to us, okay, thanks for your feedback. This is how we changed our product. And so effectively, we became the first ever investment of that cancer charity as a result. So it really shows that these things, they pay dividends in themselves, but that's your market at the end of the day, and so catering to them is absolutely core.
Meshari, same question for you.
Yeah, I would totally agree with what you've done, and that you don't need a large MVP to be able to validate your ideas. So what I would do essentially, I can within a week get answers from 1,000 people about a certain idea, what features they would like in it, and so on, and I make sure that I can add an open-ended question to be able to go back and talk to them more about it if I need to. I'm not saying you would need 1,000 people, but there is a lot of platforms that exist online where you can design some sort of a small trial without ethics, a market research, let's call it, where you can go in and talk to the right people. And another platform that I use to help validate the idea is coming to conferences like this. I see a lot of great friends and great people that are quite innovative that will help you and challenge you and will do some sort of a snowball effect where they would guide you to someone else that can help you understand and validate your idea.
Yeah, I think we have an amazing mix of different founders over here. Alice, so you've seen a lot of different startups, in your work, and you've seen different ways to build solutions for the different problems that they're working on. Do you have anything to add to what's already been said here?
Yeah, I totally agree with what my panelists have already said. I think it's a combination of taking on the appropriate feedback. Obviously, you can't listen to everyone, you can't satisfy everyone. So like Umaima said, it's all about finding a consensus and listening to those who really matter. You can't satisfy every user, but you do need to satisfy the majority of users. I think further from what I've seen with other entrepreneurs and founders and ones who've done really well, it's very much kind of getting to know the problem from the inside out, really getting on the front line. If it's something that a patient is using or a clinician is using, making sure to get there and really understand the problem. So I recently spoke to the founders of Health Tech One. They help automate sign up for patients to different GP practices. And they really went and sat with the different GP receptionists, did all the coding for the new patients, saw how much time it took, saw all the pain points. So I really think you have to become an expert in your problem space to find then the appropriate solution. And then from that point on, just keep responding to feedback, keep taking things on and keep improving.
Thanks. So to summarize so far, right, like when you want to become a founder and build your startup, you need to find the space that I think you're, invested in, as if you've seen that problem or you really understand it, you really have done your research on the unmet needs, but at some point you just have to take a leap of faith like the three of you have and try to build something. But that building will be a lot more research and understanding what's working and what's not, and just keep going from there. Obviously, the big elephant in the room for the past year and a half has been, the lack of funding for startups, especially in healthcare. I think healthcare has taken a big hit compared to the other industries. And that's a big factor of what causes startups to fail or for founders to stop working on what they're working on. I would like to get your perspectives on the current funding market and what are the best ways to raise funding? Is there a good time for it? Is there an approach that should be followed? And Alice, I think you've seen a lot of different startups, and I'll start the question off with you.
Yeah, great question. I think one of the biggest reasons in health tech that problems can arise for startups is, again, maybe lack of full awareness of the landscape, in particular the regulatory landscape. I think it's really important, no matter where you are in your development journey, even if you're still very early and going and speaking to investors for the first time, it's really important that you already have an awareness of, okay, am I a medical device or not? What kind of regulations do I need to pass? Is this a clinically safe product? Is this viable? Who are my users going to be? Where's my market going to be? I think having all that kind of information up front and showing awareness to investors, because they already have seen maybe a lot of similar products or a lot of other products in that space, so they already are quite clued up and know. So you really need to show them that you know just as much, if not more, than what they do. So I think that's very much something I would say is having all your research prepared, making sure you know everything inside out before you're speaking to investors.
So one thing I would say is there's lots of sources of funding out there, and non-dilutive. There are so many opportunities, both in the Middle East, but particularly I know that the UK and US. So we've had about $5 million in non-dilutive funding. So that has no impact on equity in your startup. It's pure funds, and it's perfect for R&D and proving concepts and getting to your first sort of product. And investors are happy to see that you've been resourceful in that way. there's obviously proof of concept funding available from different organizations. Sometimes if you're linked to a university, as we were, your tech transfer office may be able to provide some help. But also, you know, what they always say with the first sort of raise, it's usually like friends and family. So the truth is, my first investor was my mother-in-law. And, you know, she's not even on the cap table. So, you know, really that's where you start, is putting in your own piece and really showing that you are committed to this. But then when it comes to raising from external investors, I think it's really important to be pragmatic, because I think, and I'd love to hear if you guys agree with this, but I think people can get really caught up on the terms, the valuation, you know, other pieces around this. And one of my sort of mentors who's a very successful entrepreneur, gave me this piece of advice very early on in my journey. And he just said, you know, just get people on board. The bigger the pie, it doesn't matter how big your slice is, it's the size of the pie that counts. And so, you know, get people on board who are value-add investors, people who can help you with your journey, help you navigate the regulatory piece, the market access piece, and can really add value to that. You want people who understand that, you know, MedTech is not a straightforward journey. It's not a, you know, we're not selling candles. It's complex. There are particular, it's a, you know, a regulated market. And so, you know, having people on board who understand that and can add value through advice as well as funding is the key. So if you've got the good people, you know, bring them on board in whatever capacity you can.
Meshari, do you have any experience with fundraising?
Yes, absolutely. And I totally agree with what you said in terms of bringing the value add investors, the right people to come on board, because they are the ones who will understand the MedTech and what's required, the R&D, the value of non-dilutive funding, and how to get non-dilutive funding, these and opening doors to hospitals and other institutions. And to get those, it's important also to clarify or realize that raising funding is not an accomplishment, it's an obligation. I think the moment we realize this and think of our KPIs and what we need to do and focus on growing the business, we can do so much without raising a lot, and tapping into the non-dilutive fundings and other sources of funding will unlock that. Yes, the ecosystem is shrinking. There's not a lot of let's say options, but there is a lot of money still floating. And if you talk to the right people and focus on solving a big problem, investors will come.
I think there's a lot of good advice on this panel. So obviously, you know, have your relations built with the investors before you actually need those funds. Start raising any way you can. You know, friends and family is a good way, but always look into when's the best time. You know, don't get stuck up on the terms. And obviously, like you said, Meshari, you know, raising funds is not the end. That's just the start of the startup journey. You're going to get to a point where there are additional rounds that need to be raised, additional milestones that need to be met. So it's a good way to look at the funding. I wanted to just open it up to you guys. Do you have any advice for anyone that's trying to start their venture right now? What piece of advice would you give them?
I suppose, yeah, just do it. But I think, again, what I would say is from the investment side, and also thinking about, you know, demonstrating value, which we've mentioned a little bit already. I think very much, you know, looking at evidence generation early. So looking at, you know, running a small pilot, a small trial. Obviously, early stage, you're not going to have the money for a full-blown randomized control trial, but you can do small pilot studies to demonstrate that value and demonstrate the clinical impact. Because I think, you know, it's much more appealing if you're going to investors showing that your product can actually improve patients' lives or clinicians' workloads or reduce burnout, for example. So I think evidence generation, I would say, is also a big thing too.
I think 2 pieces of advice from my side. The first is look at the skills gaps in your team. There's no way that you know everything, and you need people around you who are better than you and who you can get advice from. So that's first. And the second thing is, whenever somebody offers to help, say yes. If they say, get in touch, I can connect you with this person, they do mean it. Chase them. If they don't respond, they're busy people. But what you'll find is in this ecosystem, there are so many people willing to help, even if they're not investors, they may just be advisors, or, you know, we've had a lot of support through those areas. And so, yeah, just be open to new opportunities and new connections.
I think you raised a good point, Umaima. Like there is a lot of support out there for founders. Even successful founders, they've had a lot of help from people. They've had conversations where another person's been able to help them. And there really is this culture of just passing down that help. So reach out whenever you need that help and get that support. Wanted to just ask you a follow-up question on that. What is your thoughts on accelerators and venture support programs? Do you think that's something people should consider? Do you think otherwise?
100%. We were on accelerator programs at the very start of our journey. So we were at the Judge Business School in Cambridge. Even last summer, even though we're sort of 4 or 5 years in, we were on the Cedars-Sinai Hospital Accelerator. These, as I said just a few minutes ago, you never know everything. And I think it's a constant learning journey. And so you will always gain something from these programs. And so be open to the learning, that's all.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's really all the time we had. Meshari, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, we're part of Techstars, so it's good to be in an accelerator, but going into several accelerators may raise a flag to a lot of investors. So be cautious of how many you go to and where do you spend your time, because your time is the most valuable asset you have as an entrepreneur. And another thing is, while you're doing your figuring out the problem, don't only look at the end user, look at the user who's going to, for example, in our case, it would be, let's say, the nurses. We'll talk to them to make sure the process is smooth, but also talk to the patient to know what value they get from it, and talk to the payer and see what they care about covering. You need to talk to all of these different types of people, and I wish you all the best.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me on the Seeds of Startup Success. Obviously, if any of you have any questions for them, please reach out to them, and I'm sure they'll be willing to help.